Welcome, everybody. We have an interesting mixture of people here today. I think a fair number of you have had some experience with Jen in the past, and we're happy to have you here. We have a number of folks that are curious. I've had the chance to work with Jen probably, I don't know, Jen, I'm going to guess 4 or 5 years ago, maybe.
It was a while ago. Might have been, yeah, maybe even longer. I don't know.
Yeah. I read Michael Newton's book and I thought that sounds like something I need to experience. And I went to the Newton website and found Jen that way. And I won't talk about my experience at this point, but I think, Jen, you've got some very interesting stories to tell. There are things that you've probably experienced in the intervening years since I was with you. So why don't you get started at the end of I'm going to guess that the talk should last maybe about 40 minutes. Then we'll have a question and answer period. And either you can, we're at 35 participants. I would suggest putting the questions into chat. And Mark, are you going to read the questions, or Daniel, is that your? Well,
I am.
I can handle it.
Okay.
Yeah, I got that, Jim.
Okay, Jose, that's right. All right, so put your questions in chat when we get done with the actual presentation. I guess Jose will be pulling up those questions. If there are not many questions, then we might be okay to have people come on and make their questions live rather than have to type them. But this should be interesting. Jen, why don't you start off? I'm looking forward to hearing this.
All right. So I'll primarily focus on life between lives, right? Is that what people are most curious about for today? Okay, I know the view changed. I'm going to change it back just so I can see everybody. All right. So welcome, everybody. It's so great to see some new faces and lots of familiar names and faces as well. So I'm Jen Catlin. If you don't know me, I am a transpersonal and spiritual hypnotherapist, and I focus a lot on helping people find self-compassion, self-worth, connecting to their self-worth, and spiritual exploration to connect with their soul self. And I do that in a variety of ways. Primarily today, we'll talk more about the spiritual realm of life between lives. And just very briefly, just letting you know, I came into this work because I had many things happening in my life that I couldn't explain. I didn't know what was happening. I thought I was going crazy. Really, truly, I did. I came from a Western trained psychology background. I was a school psychologist prior to all this many, many years ago. And none of this consciousness, metaphysical, anything was talked about in the Western field of psychology. So when I had things that I couldn't explain start happening in my life, I didn't know what to do. I went to a friend of mine who happens to be a clinical psychologist, and I said, you got to evaluate me. Something's going on. And she heard everything that was happening and handed me a Brian Weiss book, if any of you are familiar with Brian Weiss. And that led me down the whole rabbit hole. There was something deep inside that just said, you have to do this. So I had all of these, I have since found out called STEs, or spiritually transformative experiences. And many of you have probably experienced them as well. I was having all of that happen. I had a really, really big one happen. And within 2 weeks after that, I also had a near-death experience. I don't think there's any coincidence that it all happened that close together. And life was just an absolute mess for me at the time. I felt very ungrounded, had to go through the whole integration process that one has to go through after having STEs and NDEs. And I was led and guided into Michael Newton's work. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is much of the research and groundwork that Michael Newton laid for us. Since then, human consciousness continues to expand and has expanded so much that we're finding even more than what was reported in his books. But am curious by a show of hands of who has heard of Michael Newton or read his books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls was the second one. Yeah, so some of you are familiar. So what we do is Michael Newton discovered through his work, he was a clinical psychologist. Hi, Nora. Nora is a colleague of mine. We teach hypnotherapy certification training together. Michael Newton was a clinical psychologist who was using clinical regression to go to the origin or source of where an issue began for somebody. And one of the people he was working with regressed to the spirit realm and had a whole experience there and saw how beneficial that was for her. Michael Newton himself at the time was an atheist. He didn't believe in any of this metaphysical stuff or in any kind of afterlife. He saw how beneficial it was to the person he was working with, and it happened again. And so he decided to do some research and try to figure out what it was that was happening. And he ended up working with over 7,000 people from all different faith backgrounds because he didn't want a person's belief system to factor into the research. And so what he found and documented were the most commonly reported experiences when people were brought into these very lengthy hypnosis sessions and questioned about the afterlife. And it goes through a whole process where a person's taken back through childhood to some happy moments in childhood. We're not going through it to process trauma. And then it includes a womb regression. So you would take people back to experiencing those very first experiences and memories of coming into this life, where their consciousness is coming into this physical realm. And then through a past life or alternate lifetime, some people call it. We could get into that whole rabbit hole of, does time exist? Linear time, we won't go there. But, and then going through the transition and using that as a gateway to the spirit realm. It's not the only way to access the spirit realm. It was Michael Newton's methodology, and it is helpful for a lot of people. But what he found is, as a soul being, that there is indeed more than just this life, just this body, just this brain, that our consciousness continues after death. And there's a whole process that we experience when we're not incarnated in a body. And so some of that may be connecting with soul group. I don't know if any of you have ever had experiences where you've met somebody who you feel like, how in the world do I even know you if I've never met you before, but I know you. I hear that one a lot from people I work with who've met people that they just know, even though they don't know them. It's likely that, those people would have connections in some kind of soul group where these soul beings choose to incarnate together and experience different roles. But it could also be, there's other groups around our soul groups, and a lot of times there'll be crossover into other souls that we will experience lifetimes with, incarnate with, learn and grow together. So that's one area that might be explored, but there's many other things that can be explored as well. And so some of those would include, there's activities people talk about in terms of a soul being where they might be learning different things, like how to work with energy, or creating things through energy, or visiting other planets, other incarnated worlds, because Earth is not the only one. And for any of you who might have grown up feeling like this place feels unfamiliar, or like, what am I doing here? Or a homesickness for another place, it's often because there is a part of you that is awake and remembers your spirit home, or potentially another place where you incarnate frequently that is not here. So it could be many, many things. Exploring activities there's an entire life selection process that we go through prior to coming into each incarnation, where there's planning of who you're going to be incarnating with and specific moments moments that are important to remember, people that you'll connect with, things that you should pay attention to. It does not mean that our entire lives and every single moment is planned for us, though. There can be big things we plan for overall to learn and experience different things, but we also have free will within each moment. So that free will is important. And a lot of this is actually, a lot of what we found in Michael Newton's research actually is correlated to or very similar to people who've had near-death experiences. And Karen Thomas, there you are, is here as well to talk a little bit about her life between lives experience. And Karen also happens to be a near-death experiencer. You don't have to have had a near-death experience to connect with your higher self, because Michael Newton really discovered a process that works very well to help people go through that process and learn things about themselves and ask questions about this lifetime and their soul development without having to have a physical trauma of going, through that. So Karen, I'm curious if you would like to share a little bit about your life between lives experience, and I can kind of add any things from there.
You'll have to unmute yourself, Karen. There you go.
Sure, I'd be happy to. With my near-death experience, I had a guide who took me through the afterlife experience during my near-death experience. And then over time, I was very curious about who this person was, how they connected to me. For years after my near-death experience, I learned how to meditate and also went to consciousness conferences, all in an effort to learn more about this. And at one of the consciousness conferences that I went to, prior to that conference, in meditation, my spiritual guide, who had been in my near-death experience and had been guiding me through it, also would communicate with me from time to time in meditation. And in this one meditation, he appeared to me and communicated something he hadn't ever communicated before. And what he said was, you and I lived together thousands of years ago in South America. And then he went on to say, my name is Carlos. And after the meditation, I always would journal what I had received during meditation. So I wrote all of this down. And as I'm writing it, I'm thinking to myself, thousands of years ago, there weren't Carloses in South America. I wonder what I'm supposed to do with this, So anyway, at the consciousness conference that came up very shortly after this, in between sessions, there was a woman speaking, and I was drawn to her because she was talking about having been recently teaching healing touch in South America and having returned from there. Her name's Mary Jo Bulbrick. A lot of people within the IANS community know who she is. Others of you probably don't, and I certainly didn't at this point in time. But I was drawn to her, and she explained her experience there and going to sacred sites in between teaching sessions. And I just kept getting this tingling sensation and almost shaking inside. And she went on to say that she had gone to a sacred site called Corral Supe, and that one of the members of the Healing Touch class who lived in South America was able to take her there because the transportation fell through. So anyway, she said, she was really excited about having been to that site and and about this young man and who was so good at healing touch. And she had a holistic center and said that next week, she said, Carlos will be coming from South America. And as soon as she said the name Carlos, it was like pieces fell together for me. And I literally burst into tears. And she said, what's wrong? So I explained my whole history of my near-death experience, my guide during the near-death experience, and that he had recently appeared in a meditation and said, that we had lived together thousands of years ago in South America. My name is Carlos. And so she showed me a picture of the young man who was coming next week. And he looked identical to my guide that I had had during my near-death experience, except dressed in modern clothes instead of what he was wearing in the near-death experience and what he typically wore when I saw him in meditations. And then she said, let me show you the site that we went to. And when she showed me this site, the Corral Supe, it was identical to what I initially came out of the tunnel and into during my near-death experience. So long and the short of it is that I got to meet Carlos. That following week, we had a very strong instant bond. And his comment was, I have no idea or any sort of memory of what you're talking about, but I just know it was true. And so after that, Mary Jo and I got to be closer friends, and knowing how I felt about trying to find out how could this possibly be true. My near-death experience had been 30 some years before. This young man was looking exactly like the guide had looked 30 some years ago and in my meditations. And I said, this just doesn't make sense time-wise, anything. And that's when she introduced me to Michael Newton's books. And she said, I think if you read these books, you may be able to understand a little bit more about it. And so I did. And in the second book, I found out that your spiritual guide can on occasion incarnate in the same life that you're in, and yet continue to be your spiritual guide. And that Michael Newton explains in terms of you always leave a percentage, an essence of yourself on the other side at all times. And it's only a portion of your essence that incarnates. And so the spirit guide's essence that's always on the other side can continue to be your spirit guide and still can incarnate in the same lifetime that you're in. So that fascinated me, and I wanted to know more about it. So I looked for life between lives regression hypnotherapists, and I live in central North Carolina. And in looking through, I found Jennifer. And I was particularly drawn to her because she said in her kind of description of herself that she had lived in upstate New York, and that's where I had moved from also. And so that was how we happened to come together, and she happened to do between lives regression with me. And I did learn more, a good deal more about my spirit guide. I learned about, how a particular past life experience I had impacted on what I do now within this life. It just was real helpful.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you, Karen. And Karen and I since found out, there are numerous other crazy connections that in paths that we had crossed that we didn't even know until we started talking. But that's how the universe works.
yeah.
So,
And,
go ahead.
including that the last place that I lived in upstate New York was the place that Jennifer had been born and brought up. And in a work experience of mine in the past that we had we believed that we had connected there. And I just never put two and two together, never realized until we really got to know one another a lot better.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Mhm.
So as Karen mentioned, from that realm, we're not alone in these incarnations. We're being guided by others. We have spirit guides, and they're always with us. There are beings always watching out for us and guiding us along this journey, and you can connect with them. This realm of your spirit home is so unconditionally loving. It's hard to even put into words the experience of that until you have the experience of it. It's like, it's so powerful. And like I said, it's just hard to explain. There are no words for just how loving this realm is. And I know that as human beings, we don't always feel that way towards ourselves. Some of us can be particularly self-critical and have harsh thoughts or beliefs or feelings about ourselves. But being able to connect with a part of who you are beyond this lifetime, and any mistakes made or any experiences lived or conditioned beliefs, that you have picked up through your lifetime is incredibly powerful, because it helps you connect with your true nature. And we really all come from that place of love. So that's why I love the work. And it's interesting because when you're in the realm of the spirit realm and experiencing, like I said, where a session goes can be different for every person, because it just depends on what it is that you're needing to have access to at this time, the types of questions that you might come in with. But from that space, you can access the consciousness of the human that you are today. Also, the consciousness of who you are when you're coming into the womb, into this lifetime. But you can also access the consciousness of who you were in alternate lifetimes. And so from that space, you could be dealing with multiple aspects or incarnated beings, by yourself. But despite where you are, any lifetime that you're incarnated in, as Karen mentioned, there's always a part of us, a percentage of us, our energy that remains in the spirit realm. And so we're always, always, always connected to it. And sometimes people will, through meditation, have spontaneous experiences that help them connect even further to that realm. This is just one method that helps people to, like I said, experience some of their true nature, some of the afterlife process and what's happening to us when we're not incarnated, without having to go through any type of physical trauma or near-death experience. But I remember, Karen, when you first came to, you had mentioned that when you read Michael Newton's book, it was kind of the first thing you found that really described so much of your near-death experience.
Yes, yeah. It really was, it was like finding the pieces that made sense, and helping to integrate what had happened in my experience, and yet also connect to the spiritual realm further. The whole concept of soul group, for example, and people who were part of your soul group and now are living incarnated with you now, and that there are connections that continue along those lines. That was really helpful. I had some of the research I had done had talked about how everything was completely set in a lifetime for you, that really you didn't have any choice, that it was all destined, and every single thing could not be changed, was destined, and was going to happen in exactly that way. And I found that didn't relate to me either. It just didn't feel quite right, because I felt strongly about free will. your own free will choices, and that everyone has them. And just in interacting together with different people having free will choices, that it didn't make sense to me that everything was just kind of destiny and written in stone, and nothing was changeable.
You're getting into an area that I'd like to probe a little bit at. We haven't talked about how we come into this life with a plan of things we want to accomplish. So the notion of, Karen, you're alluding to it, that there is this, at least some that would say there are things that we have to do, but we have free will. So can you talk a little bit about that, Jen? What kinds of objectives do you hear people coming in, and how can they exercise their free will to maybe change that path?
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of times when I'll bring people's consciousness to the womb space in utero, not a lot of the times, but when I hear that they feel like there's no choice, I like, for people who really don't like to be in that space, or get a sense when they enter that space that I really don't want to be here, but I'm being forced to be here. And I'll back them up and bring their awareness to an earlier time, to just prior to coming into this life and incarnating. Their whole energy shifts, and there's often this deep look of surprise on their face, because there's a realization like, oh, I did choose this. And they weren't expecting that. And so, yes, part of the process, which typically happens not as much in a past life regression session, but in life between lives, is to explore the life selection process, where people describe it differently. I mean, the way that we access this information can show up differently for each person, depending on how the human mind processes and what's going to make the most sense to the human mind. But essentially, the core of it remains the same for everybody. And so, there's typically a process of working with guides, and also with other beings that are going to play an important role in our lifetime, and figuring out, like, how are we all going to fit into this life experience together? Who is my family going to be? Are we going to be close in this lifetime or not? Do I need to gain some independence? Because whatever's happening in the spirit realm is happening here in this physical plane as well. And so sometimes our souls go through development too. And sometimes our souls need to start experiencing some growth and independence, and that may take shape and form in our incarnated life as well. But I always hear, oh no, I actually do have a choice of whether I'm going to come in or not. And the soul is often feeling eager to have this new experience. It's more the human when we're in this denser form that it's saying, put on the brakes. I don't want to be here anymore. And so it's fascinating to see that when we can move through different points of time in that experience. But people have described sometimes having, one, choosing a physical body. So deciding, there could be choices, and like, why do you choose this body over others? And is this body a good match to your soul's consciousness? But also choosing particular life experiences, depending on what it is the soul is choosing to experience and learn, is going to depend on really what life that they're coming into, and what are the big experiences that will help them accomplish those goals. Do we always get it perfectly right? No. I mean, that's where, free will comes in as well. But those big key moments are often decided on in the spirit realm. But then how we choose to be with those moments and react to those moments, our free will is going to come into play there.
So I know people sometimes come, at least from people I've met and things I've read, people will sometimes come in with some very challenging things to experience that from a purely human perspective, you'd say, why would I ever want to do that? So if somebody comes to you, and have you had people, first of all, that have come to you like that? And when they see that this is part of their plan to have these, from a human perspective, negative experiences, does it help them understand and cope with those things any better?
Yeah, I've noticed a big shift in perspective, and it happened to me as well. So I can very much relate to, there's certain experiences I think we all have. And sometimes I've even joked, like, how intelligent really is my soul for choosing this? But ultimately, it really does help people come to, I think, a place of gratitude overall, because there's like a disidentification with the human self through this process. And that's helpful because oftentimes we think, this is who I am. I am an anxious person or a worrier or this or that. And that becomes our identity. When people are able to be in the spirit realm and connect with their soul self and experience something bigger than just this life, and it's like, oh, this is who I am, not this, and get a sense of, part of the process is learning about why they've chosen certain experiences. And I don't want to lead people. I'm not going to lead people and say, but you chose this. I want them to discover that for themselves. And typically, once you get them into that realm, it all just falls into place for people anyway, and they have that awareness. And so I have seen perspective shift pretty significantly from feeling very victimized, of course, because there are things in life that we don't want to wish upon anybody. And it is important to advocate for those people in this lifetime. It's not about, just completely bypassing that, but helping the individual be able to connect with their soul self and discover that it's just very empowering, is what I found, is people feel like it takes them out of being victimized to reclaiming their inner power. And what am I really on a soul level learning or gaining from this experience? And how can I best utilize this in my life to empower me to move forward? And that's what I see happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it occurs to me as you're talking that perhaps somebody who's come in and had all these negative experiences, and then they have this between life review and they realize who they really are, that doesn't negate the value of what they've learned up to that point. And maybe by having the therapy, you can move beyond that. You don't have to have that be a part of the rest of your life. You've gotten the value that you wanted to get out of it when you decided to incarnate. And so maybe your therapy work allows people to move on and get on to other objectives.
Sure. And part of the process too is to just uncover what it is energetically they might be holding on to and carrying that maybe needs some healing in some way. And I'm not doing the work as the healing. Their guides and their connection with their own soul self is part of the healing process that they're discovering on their own. I believe that every one of us has the capability to do that ourselves. And, my role is just to help people connect to that space, but it's coming from within.
Yeah, so that's interesting. When we think of a therapist, we tend to think of somebody who is taking information in and proactively guiding you as to how you should be. Whereas this kind of therapy work, it sounds more like you're just leading them to a place where they can get information and they heal themselves.
Yeah, the healing often spontaneously happens, and oftentimes it's because of the perspective shift that they have, and just realizing that there is a bigger picture here, and there is something that can be learned, and what tools can I utilize in my life to help me move through whatever challenges I've had. There are some experiences in the Newton methodology where we're going back through childhood. Typically, I'm guiding people to happy childhood memories because the objective is not to work on any past discomfort or trauma, challenging experiences. However, I also trust that wherever a person's awareness takes them is where they need to go.
Mhm.
And so there are times where some of that unhappy, unpleasant stuff will come up, and then we will do some inner child work or something around that. We can usually process through that fairly quickly and then move on to experience the rest of the session. So sometimes there are components that involve that, but once a person connects more with the spirit realm and with their soul nature, it just takes on a life of its own, where I'm kind of stepping back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do people come to maybe see synchronicities in their life in a different way?
Yeah. One of the things that draws people in is they're having synchronistic types of experiences in their lives and just wondering, what is this? Why is this happening? And so, yes, people realize that it's not just a random occurrence, that these are actually things to pay attention to, and they have meaning and significance in their lives. They might start to understand personal relationships, which have either been beneficial or challenging in their life, and understanding why that is. And again, getting that perspective shift frequently leads to a process of forgiveness that happens in those challenging circumstances. And it doesn't mean, forgiveness is a whole other topic. It doesn't mean saying what happened was okay or that I'm forgetting what happened, but it's like, truly there's this unconditional love that connects us despite anything. And that can include having healthy boundaries in life sometimes. But yes, all kinds of perspective shifts on that.
Yeah. Well, why don't we open up to some questions? I know I could ask a lot more, but I think we had a couple. Jose, are you with us? Want to bring up any of the questions in the chat?
Sure, I'm ready. So the first question, I believe, is from Anne Bryan. And the question is, and hello, Jen, I have never met you before, so I'm glad to meet you.
Me too, I've heard all about you.
Okay, you ready? In the planning and preparation for coming into this incarnation, what are thoughts on whether we can borrow and pick up talents from others during our life between lifetimes? So can we borrow talents from others during our life between lifetime? And I guess the rest of the question is the concept of whether we can and do shop in an Akashic soul, Akashic talents, memory, space, store, library before incarnating. So.
Yeah, Anne, and I know Anne too, we've done some work together. So Anne, do you mean carry talents from alternate lifetimes, or where do you mean borrow talents from?
I was introduced to the idea that, yes, we bring our talents from other incarnations, from other times, however, whatever phrase we want to use, but that we may also borrow from an Akashic record type of spot. So if I was going to incarnate as a teacher in this lifetime and I didn't have the skills that I wanted to bring from my own previous incarnations, I could go to a central bank, so to speak, and go, oh, I'd like to review this life and take his talents. Oh, I need more compassion than I've developed to date. So I'd really like to look at this person's lifetime and borrow their experience so that we come with talents, with skills, with emotions, and possibly even remembrances that aren't ours, but that we've borrowed as tools to enhance this experience.
That's an interesting question. I think we do bring things with us that we're going to need on this journey. I've not heard it personally stated that way. I have heard library. Many people in sessions have gone to library and accessed. A lot of times they're accessing lifetimes they've experienced. And we do work with members of our soul group and other soul groups skills together. And, I find frequently that people who are doing things like teaching here are also describing teaching in the spirit realm or doing things like that. I think, it's probably a possibility. I just haven't personally heard it explained that way, of borrowing something from another lifetime that isn't personally like our own soul, connection to that. But I think that's an interesting concept. I don't know if anybody else has heard that or could maybe answer that better than I could.
Well, can I offer something on that?
Yes, please.
I think one of the things when you initially begin to learn about what you're calling alternate lifetimes, some people talk in terms of past lifetimes. However, when we think that way, we're using our own linear time mindset that we're in because we're living in this earth lifetime. However, linear time really isn't involved in the spirit realm as far as I am aware of. And so therefore, I think alternate lives can be future, alternate lives can be alternate, lifetime that would be maybe an alternate earth, for example, but in the same time frame as another alternate life, but in a different earth time frame. There's so many different possibilities that people really don't actually think of. But I think they all connect to your own soul life, your soul experience personally, as opposed to saying, well, I don't remember a lifetime where I was a teacher, for example. And I already know about this past lifetime and this past lifetime, and there's none in there where I can fit in the linear time frame, a lifetime where I was a teacher. So I must be borrowing this skill from somebody else's lifetime, where that's not necessarily, I don't think that it's not necessarily necessary, because your alternate lives have such a tremendous amount of variety of where they were, what type of a time frame they were, and a lot of them you don't have immediate access to until you have a need.
Exactly. I can weigh in. I think this is Sheila, and I'm actually an Akashic Records reader. And my experience has been that, folks have both, have two lineages. They have an ancestral DNA memory lineage, and they have a soul lineage. And energy needs to be cleared with what I do from both separately for some reason. However, there's a different concept now. Energy comes in both on ancestral DNA memory from incarnation to incarnation across time geography. It also remains in the soul lineage. So that energy, that's your soul's energy, remains as it travels incarnation to incarnation. There's a different principle that I see at play here, and that is entanglement. Because in quantum mechanics, when you talk about entanglement, you talk about a duplicate of an atom being found somewhere else in the cosmos, but it actually belongs to your soul. So I think what happens is that we can go retain or get those pieces of our soul that may be in a different place in the cosmic consciousness, but they are still part of our soul. They're still part of our soul energy. We're able to go bring them in to this incarnation, this lifetime. One of the stories that comes to mind is that somebody had a near-death experience and they came back being an excellent musician. Well, in near-death experiences, often we can travel and pick up some of that energy that is definitely in our soul lineages that we're not using in this incarnation, but it can become part of us as we move forward.
I've had people hear, similar to that, like you mentioned the piano. I've had people here, I just had that happen today. I had somebody hear a conversation happening in a language they've never spoken before, ever,
Right.
but they knew exactly what was being said.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, now that could be an incarnation that resides somewhere else
right.
that they're just tapping into. It could
Right.
be in our time, in our linear time, somewhere else, or it could be part of their soul lineages that is in the records, and they're accessing it.
Thank you for that. That was a team effort. So your next question, Jen, is from Kate. And she is asking, how does our soul purpose align with free will?
How does our soul, oh my gosh, that's a big question. How does our soul purpose align with free will? Well, I think our souls choose, from what I hear and what I've experienced, our souls choose to have an experience for a particular reason. And so it may take many lifetimes to go through one specific lesson that we're trying to learn until we really get it. And that's why we'll experience lifetimes from all walks of life. And, different places, different types of life experiences, sometimes playing one role, then another role. And so I do think we come in with an overall picture of what it is we want to learn, and then how this life is going to sort of be set up to try to help us learn that. But that we, within those instances, we have free will to choose how we're going to respond in the lifetime to those incidences. And, this can take many lifetimes to learn one lesson. It's not like everything is predestined and we experience it and okay, it's great. I mean, this is a learning process for us as soul beings as well. So it can take many times around before we really get it. I don't know if that's answering your question.
Well, thank you, Kate and Jen. The next one, I guess, is really more of a comment. I'll just read it to you, then we'll go to the next question. This is from Jen H. I've heard from astrology that your soul has free will when agreeing to incarnate, even though we don't remember. And we aren't forced to follow the purpose/path that we originally signed up for. So that's a comment from Jen H. And the next question is from Marjolin. And my session with Jennifer is definitely coming from within or above that guided me. I am wondering if anyone else has had an experience with yellow light energy that put them into more of a personal place of power on earth. So this might be a broader question for the group, but so I guess the question is, I am wondering if anyone else has had an experience with yellow light/energy that put them into more of a personal place of power on earth. And maybe Jen, you could start to answer that.
Well, I've worked with many people who've had experiences with colors and energy, and just no matter what a person is experiencing, I always want to know, how is this significant for you? What does this mean for you as a soul being, and also in this human incarnation? So that's one question I'll ask when colors or other things come in for people. But I don't know if there's anybody else here who has had, that particular experience.
Jose, I don't know if you could concisely talk about what you're doing with color.
That's it might be a long story, but I am working with color. I had an experience when I was in a near-death experience where I had like an education from color. To put it in a short way, and I learned how to paint, and anyway, the color was alive and it spoke to me. So in my mind, I believe color is living. I don't believe that light is just a form of energy that we think has no life. And I've been working with quite a few people in the mental health arena right now, in particular, in trying to define what each color means. So if I paint with a specific color, what does that mean? And I think we've narrowed it down pretty well right now. And I'm thinking that this would be a great tool for them to be able to use so that they could get some insight into their clients' simply right at the get-go. So instead of taking 2 years for you to say, hey, this is happening to me, you kind of, they get some insight, and maybe in a week or two, they're able to dive into that. So that would be coming from my perspective. Very interesting that you got so many people that have these instances of color. I know a lot of near-death experiencers have that experience with color. So then the next question is from Precious, and that's really I guess how we could get in contact with you. How does one start working with Jennifer?
So I can type my website in the, that might be the easier way, in the chat box.
There you go.
For,
Okay.
yeah, sessions or hypnotherapy certification training. There's information on both there. And Jose, I wanted to just piggyback off of the color thing. In my own near-death experience, that was the majority of my experience, where I had a 360-degree view. I was inside this sort of, I don't know, gem-like structure with, it was open at the top, but they were colors that I hadn't even entirely seen here.
Right.
And they were very bright and vivid. And it was interesting to hear you say that you believe that they're living, because I felt like that was what was sustaining the life of my body at the time. There was an energy of some sort, of something, but I felt like it was something alive coming off of those gems. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, because my experience is I felt like I was in the center of a basketball, and this was 360 all around me. But I heard them talking.
Yeah.
There were like millions of voices talking, and I couldn't pick one distinctly, but I could hear like a chatter. That's really interesting. We should talk.
Yeah. I heard a voice too, but I only heard one voice that told me not to leave that space.
There you go. Yeah. So Daniel, I don't know if you have your hand up or not, but he was asking, can you do regressions via Zoom? And if you do have your hand up, Daniel, then you might just ask the question if there was an addition to that. So can you do regressions over Zoom?
I do. Yes.
Okay. Daniel, anything you want to add?
Nope, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So this is Jesse now. And the question is, do we ever stop reincarnating? Do we stop reincarnating? And if we do, what happens then?
Yeah, we do. I mean, there's a whole sort of progression that happens. So eventually, according to Michael Newton's research and what his clients had reported in the research, is that we would then go on to support on the other side. Eventually as guides or junior guides first, then moving to guides and helping to guide others who are incarnating. Yeah, absolutely.
There's something that I've read, Jen, I guess out-of-body experiencers, maybe, I can't remember his name, Jürgen Ziwe, talks about there being other physical realms that we can incarnate in, but there are some that we have to have progressed spiritually as beings of love before we can access some of those places. Any thoughts on that? You know, if we go into this spirit world, I think I recall Michael talked about there are different thresholds and levels. That I remember reading one where I think a grandfather came and greeted somebody, but then he left because he was already part of a higher level of spiritual existence. Can you comment on that?
Do you mean being at a certain level and then being able to incarnate in a certain place?
No, well, there are two aspects to it. On the other side, that there are, I don't know if I want to use the word levels, but I can't think of a different way of saying it. People who've maybe had a lot of lives and have evolved further, on on the other side have access to maybe a broader array of realms, but also in this physical realm, there are, maybe not necessarily in this universe, but there are places that you could incarnate on in a completely different life form. But in order to, it's like you have to have grown to a certain level in order, you couldn't just step in, because this, where they are spiritually is quite a bit beyond where we are.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in that. So I've had experiences of guiding people, and it's happening, I would say, much more frequently in the past few years. I've noticed exponential growth and I don't know if it's just energetically drawing them in because I've had an experience like this myself or not, but I think other practitioners are noticing it too. More and more people are having access suddenly to incarnations in other worlds where it's spontaneously coming through, and frequently at times when people don't even know that's possible. And so it can be very surprising for people. That's what happened to me when I had an experience and thought I was going crazy. And Nora was actually guiding me on that. Nora, did you want to say something?
Yes. Hi. Well, I don't want to butt into your story, but I mean, what I'll say is, can I share? I don't want to, but it speaks, your LBL speaks directly to this, which is Jen was in a couple of lifetimes that were primarily energy based, it seems like incarnations of really unconditional transcendent love. And this was, we get into this quantum field of time frame when I don't know if time is actually applicable, but that she was such a communal, energetic, intertwined, holistic being with her community. And part of what her intention coming into this lifetime was to connect more with the individuality of the human realm, right? So, being of a higher vibrational, I think in that lifetime, you were sending healing just from that planet of love, right?
From that one, yes. Yeah, there were bodies, but it was very, communal.
Yeah. And so I've seen that where people are in, because Jen and I are colleagues, and I also do this work, and they, clients, students, people are experiencing incarnations where they're just energy beings, where they're doing the work. They're conscious, they're aware of themselves, they have things that they're doing, and they're just energy, or they're just light beings. So I think as we expand our consciousness in the human mind, this is totally just my perception, as human beings are able to come out of the boxes of needing for things to make sense in a very contextualized, orderly way, we allow ourselves to gain greater access to what's really going on, because there's a lot. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and Jim, I haven't, not to say it's not the case, I just don't know. I've never really questioned, I guess, related it to where a soul is on their experiential journey, in terms of sort of development. I mean, I know we relate to it as levels, and Michael Newton talks about levels, and it's not meant in any kind of hierarchy way. We're all moving along the same progression. But so it's possible that maybe it relates to where a soul is at in their journey and what they're able to access at that point. But I will say that overall, I've noticed some kind of shift, and especially in the past few years, where it's happening very frequently that individuals are experiencing other realms, other dimensions. And again, yes, it can be very curious, but I want to know, how is this significant for you in your life now? Like, why are you being shown this, and how can you utilize this in your life today?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Bill has his hand raised. You want to mute?
Yeah, you had mentioned, or the information on the meeting mentioned, I think you had some connection with Zen, and that resonated with me because I found a lot of my questions were answered by some of the stuff that I've read from some Zen teachers. Can you comment on that a little bit?
About
Well, if you have gotten involved with Zen much, and if so, how it's helped you, or what you
yeah.
from it.
So I don't know about specifically Zen lineage, but I have a background in mindfulness in particular. That came into my life, that lineage probably a couple of decades ago, or more at this point. I've lost track of time. But when I was in graduate school, and so that became a big part of my own personal practice. And I don't know exactly where these concepts line up exactly in the Zen lineage, but I do sense that there is an underlying component of unconditional love in all of it. And that coming from a place of our inner beings first and self-compassion, and then it's kind of like a fountain, I see, that will flow from there.
Okay. Thank you for that. If anybody has a question, please just type it in the chat. Or raise your hand. I'm not really seeing any more questions, but
Jen, I'm reading a book right now called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that there are aspects of it that don't jive with my understanding of things. That the objective in Buddhism is to completely let go of your ego. And when you do that, you don't need to come back and reincarnate. So that resonates to some extent with what Michael's saying. But it seems to me that there's a lot of, use the word proselytizing, that you have to find a master and go through this process. My sense is that that's one path you can follow, but that's not the only path.
Yeah, I think so. I read that, gosh, a long time ago. I probably can't remember specifics about it. Yeah, I agree. I think what that truth is going to be and what the path is going to be I remember seeing a t-shirt one time, a teacher of mine had on that said, truth is one, paths are many. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think we all are introduced to different things in our lifetimes. And to me, what's most important is what resonates with your inner self. I think most of us here, if not all of us, have had moments where we've had such strong gut intuition that has come forward where it's like, this is a yes or this is a no, that you can just feel it in your whole being. And that's what's most important.
Keep doing. We're not
I think
anything, just reflect.
Oops, I think someone. So I think that's what's most important, is to listen to that inner guidance, because I don't know that there's a right or wrong path. I think it's, what is your life experience in this life and what's right for you versus what's right for this person. And it's going to be different. Our paths are going to vary because we're not all here to experience the same things on a soul level. And what I sense, again, I don't know, this is getting into deeper stuff, is that source, whatever that is, and we're all a part of it, is experiencing itself through the experience of each one of us and everything here on this planet and in the universe. And so we're all living it, and we're on that path. And as long as we listen to our inner guidance from that heart-centered and soulful place, instead of, letting the mind dictate everything, then we're gonna choose the paths that are most resonant for us.
Here's a thought. Going back to something Karen said earlier about time, that there is no such thing as time. If all these incarnations that we're experiencing are all happening simultaneously, that would tend to say to me that if we think of ourselves as on a trajectory for spiritual evolution, then that would seem to be linked with the notion of time. If there is no such thing as time and we're having all these life experiences, then the Jim Fisher part of soul is having this experience, but Bob Jones part of the soul is having another experience. We could be at vastly different kind of evolved levels at the same time, and the soul already is evolved.
Yeah.
It's just a kind of philosophical thought that was, I don't know, there's much meaning to it, but.
This is where my head starts to explode.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I brought something for you, Jose, and I put it up in the chat. But it's interesting because we were talking about color earlier. And this is actually a YouTube of a lecture that James Gates Jr. at the University of Maryland, who's a quantum physicist, gave. And he was talking about the string theory. And he had listed multiple formulas that describe the string theory, which is now a theoretical definition of the atom. And when anybody lists these formulas, there are repeating portions of the formulas that are the same. One portion gets changed at a time. So there's this long list of formulas. And what he did was attach a color to each moiety in the formulas that was the same. And when he did this, he could make really beautiful geometric forms out of these formulas. But then the last picture that he shows is actually looks like a painting. It has colors in it, and it comes from those formulas. It's derived from those formulas. It looks a lot like the art that you do, Jose. So that's what I have placed in the chat for you. It's the YouTube video, and you don't have to listen to the whole thing, but like from minute 38 to the end, you will see all of his artwork that he presented when he presented this talk. It's interesting.
I did note that. So we do have a couple of questions. Sorry, my computer just kind of spun out, so I'm on Anastasia now. So, yeah, and the next question is from Jesse. What is the typical progression for a person to discover their past lives? Are there individuals who aren't able to access their past lives?
So there's many different methodologies and paths to do that. Hypnotherapy is one, where we would guide people through a session. Typically, the way that I do them is to guide people to a lifetime that's important for them to explore, unless there's something specific they want to connect with. Most people in session, because it can be a few hours long, connect with one lifetime, and then we'll do a life review of that life as well. And so you would work your way back through childhood, do a womb regression, a past life regression, and then do a life review of that lifetime. But there are other ways as well. So in hypnotherapy, most people, I would say the vast majority of people, are able to connect. At this point in time, I now send preparation materials, just learned over time, to people to do some practice before coming in. And that helps. And if there's any issues with the practice, then people just let me know so we can figure out what's going on. We do some work with the conscious mind, because that's, if anything's going to interfere, it's going to be the conscious mind. So I like to do that in the beginning of a session. But there are other paths as well. working with somebody who does Akashic record reading would be one path. Working with mediums can access that. With hypnotherapy, you are accessing it directly. So that's just the difference. But I think there's many paths, and it's just what is resonant for each person.
Well, thank you, Jesse and Jen. So Shirley wants to know, isn't that the ultimate goal, that we each realize we are source and spirit? Are we here to learn our lessons and become love spirit?
Yeah, isn't that the big question? What are we here for? What is the point of all of this? I believe, yes. I mean, my personal belief, and this could be entirely wrong, I don't know, but my personal belief from my own experiences and experiences of working with many other people is that we are here to experience. And part of that is to experience the perception of being separate from source. And because we have that experience of being separate, we can also learn the opposite of that, of what our true nature is, and that we are one and we are whole and complete. And we going through challenges is part of that experience. It's like if we already knew that, then there'd be no point in going through some of the challenges we go through. But those challenges can lead to this greater awareness. Everything would be stagnant otherwise. But yeah, I believe that we're all searching. What's underlying our search is like this feeling of separateness, and the sense that I'm not enough in some way, or that something's missing. And that, yes, our work is to come to that place of recognizing our wholeness.
Bill has his
And
hand raised.
Yeah, this is kind of a departure from the way what we're doing it. And Jose, I'd be interested in knowing what your take is on this. You keep bringing up instances of where people can experience and express like new dimensions of being with colors. And I was wondering if there's are other ways to do it. If, for example, instead of using colors, you could do stuff like musical stuff or something other than, if there are other ways to express the same kind of energies and the experiences with them. And Jose, your background intrigues me because you came at this from as a scientist, essentially, because you had an electrical background, and then it was like a real materialistic type of thing in the sense that everything was measurable, and that makes sense to me. And then with the near-death experience, all that kind of expanded. And so I was wondering if you've ever thought about maybe having the same kind of expansion in other ways other than colors, but using the same energy levels, if that makes sense.
Well, I'll just take a little crack at it, and then Jen, maybe you. I'm absolutely certain there are other ways. I think sound simply is a vibration. Color ultimately is a form of energy, a vibration. You know, when we think science, we don't really know what energy is. You know, we could see some particles. We could say, you know, we get into the subatomic world and things like that, and we have a sense of something. But even electricity, when you know, we know it pops in and out of existence. We don't know where it goes and what it comes back with. So I do find that compelling. But I believe sound is maybe the next way to do this. Color is simple because I could sit down with a box of crayons and I could color and we could see it. Sound, I think, might be a little more challenging because you would have to know how to play certain things. So maybe we would have to create a space where we have 8 sounds, and maybe we could use those 8 sounds, and then you could begin to identify a sound and attach it to a specific. So when I work with color, I know that a specific color is associated with trauma. So when I see the color, I could ask that person a little bit about their past or something. And with 80% certainty, I know that they're going to tell me that something traumatic happened at a certain age. So you could identify abuse, you could identify certain aspects of people just by the colors they choose. Now, why they choose those colors is what's curious to me. You know, is that coming from, in my mind, it's coming from somewhere else, you know, because we don't know what those colors mean. We don't even think about it. So if I give you a box of 24 crayons, I know pretty well the 6 colors you're going to pick. You know, why? You have 24 colors, but these are just interesting things. So, Jen, what is your take on that?
That's fascinating to me. And this is a fascinating question because it made me think for a minute. So one thing you might not know about me is prior to going to school, my bachelor's was in psychology and elementary education. Then I went on for my master's in school psychology. Prior to that, I had actually switched majors as an undergraduate. I was a music major to begin with up in New York. And sound to me is where my deep connection is, and sound to me is like a living being. I can feel it. If there is something that, if I'm wanting to connect to that deep emotional space or that place of consciousness, all I have to do is put on some type of music that I know is going to immediately connect me there. And so my guess is there probably is some type of pathway, but as Jose mentioned, it probably is more challenging because it's going to take some level of skill to be able to produce that either vocally or instrumentally.
It's interesting because when I do the practice, sound is integral. So in my case, I use drumming and things like that, but there is definitely something that takes us. It guides us somewhere. And I kind of like to say you ride on music. So you ride on the sound. It's kind of like your transportation.
Mute, currently unmuted.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, real quick though, to follow up on the question, if maybe it'd be kind of interesting to see if you could measure like brain waves or some kind of responses to see if you could get the same reaction with a certain set of sounds as you could with a certain set of colors.
I'm sure you can. And right now I'm working with about 40 mental health professionals so that we could try to create I'm going to call it an information silo so that they could begin to do this. And if they begin to get the same stuff that we're doing, then we could go somewhere to get these research done. And I didn't know you were a mental health professional yourself, Jen.
My background's in school psychology, but I'm not practicing under that right now. I mean, I kind of left that field and have been focusing on hypnotherapy. Yeah.
So I'm gonna just want to step out of this, and this is Jen's event. So I thank you for that. I appreciate that question, but let me see if we have any other questions.
Karen, you had your hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted to make a connection, I guess you could say. You're talking about energy, and Jose, you're saying you feel the energy of color, and Jen talked about music and the energy there. In my near-death experience, I was given representation by my guide during the near-death experience of people who were praying for me. And the energy of each prayer was represented in the NDE as though it were a musical note. And each musical note, one connected to another, and was coming closer to where I was. And what my guide explained was that every prayer has its own unique vibration. And to show to me the vibration of the prayer, it just was physically represented as though it were a musical note. And so that to me is just one more example of the fact that the vibration, the energy can be expressed multiple different ways. And in my case, those prayer energies were represented as though they were musical notes. And people have asked me, did I hear it? Did I hear sounds in music? No, it was all a visual musical note, one different than another, but connected together. And each one a unique vibration of a prayer. So I think it just kind of ties in with what we were saying.
In LBLs, people experience sound vibration, or as a soul being doing some activities where sound is a major component of that. I don't know if anybody here that I've worked with, I know some people had to sign off, has had that particular experience, but I've heard that a lot along with color. So those two things definitely make an appearance in LBL sessions.
Yeah.
Lana, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, as I'm sitting here listening to everything, we're talking about energy and vibration. And a lot of times people always talk about colors and sound and that kind of thing. But what I'm getting is that it's everything, because sound comes in different frequencies and waves and stuff. Colors do too. Aromas. Oftentimes I smell different things, and they can come and they can make you feel agitated. Some things make you feel really nice. And it's that way with touch. You know, you touch velvet. To me, velvet's my fabric. Or you can just touch different things and have a different feeling about what you're experiencing. Lights, you know, you can have a bright light that just kind of scares you. You can have a soft light. You could have a light that's warm, you know, all these different things. And I was thinking too about water, you know, the different densities of water. Water can be overwhelming to you. It can be very calming to you. It sounds good too. It has, you know, goes with that. Fire can be warming to you. It could be something that's going to help you, or it could be something that will intimidate you, like forest fires. And, you know, it's just the earth itself, picking up sand. Sand might make you think of the beach, or it could be clay that's really hard. You can't get through it. Or all of them have different frequencies and vibrations, but I won't say we only do. Oftentimes we think about sound and colors because that's what we see or around the most, but it's everything. It's everything. It's even the people next to you. You feel their energy. And some people kind of get you off guarded. Other people make you feel really good. Animals, some of them you don't like, and others you just love to death. Or it's all that's what I was thinking as we were talking about this. It's all the energies, and everything's got it. And it made me think about Betty Jean Eady, the first person I ever heard say anything about NDE. That was way back on Oprah's show years ago. And she said she became one with a rose. And I'm like, this is freaky. But since then, I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole. I totally get what she's talking about now, because when she went up on the other side, she just became one with everything. And like even in The Wizard of Oz, how they said the plants would turn and look at them when they went through the poppy field and all that kind of thing. And so there's so much stuff we don't know. There's so much we don't know yet, but we'll remember later.
That's so true. And if we are indeed all a component of source and everything else is too, then we all are each other.
Exactly. The oneness, that's it.
Well, and then that goes back to whether or not we can borrow from other people's lives. So if we are all one, then we are borrowing from other people's lives because it's the same life or same trajectory.
And maybe it's not borrowing, it's just experience it. Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Or
That's the word.
re-experiencing.
So,
It's
I just,
fun to play with. I'm just playing. It's definitely expansive for the human mind.
I'm just going to cut in here. I got to cut in because Anne wants to ask a question, but before we go there, color is everywhere. We can't escape it. It's the most, of all the things that we experience in the five senses, color is the most prevalent, light. So just with that said, Anne, you have a question, you have your hand raised, and I'm going to look for anybody else after that.
I was just reflecting as individuals were speaking that in my own experience, in addition to, having 2 sessions with Jennifer, I have found that deep tissue massage has brought about awareness and knowing and past life reflections, as well as tuning forks and sound. So I think your comment that because we experience lives in this incarnation, we're so focused on sound and sight, it makes sense that we're stimulated in that way, and that certainly there are other ways, as was it Shirley who just spoke, addressed. So I'm just grateful we have at least 2 ways or 3 or 4 or 5 to experience this, because I think my life is richer because of these experiences, and they may be happening more now simply because I have more time at this stage of my life when I'm not having to work full time. So it's a wonderful opportunity to get to see some of that richness before we transition and do it again.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I know some people who have do intense meditation, especially with Kundalini yoga, intense meditation or Tibetan meditations. They have experienced colors that they can't describe because they're not in our spectrum, and we as humans can only recognize certain colors. So they explain that, yes, I saw these colors, but I don't know how to explain what they were because I have no point of reference for it. So it's interesting to me. I mean, and I assume they're in the gamma wavelength. I don't know, but it's interesting to me that there are other colors out there that we don't recognize. And I know when color comes in, I ask about chakra colors when I do my work. And when energy comes in from another galaxy in the form of a color, which we're asking for, it comes in as black. And then it has to be translated into one of the colors that we recognize. So there are other colors out there that we can access in meditation. We just, we don't know how to talk about them,
Yeah, there's not words sometimes. People have that in sessions too, or near-death experiences and LBLs. So much of the time, that was another thing I heard today was, I don't know how to describe this. There's just no words for it. And so there is so much more happening than we're able to convey through the human language that we have developed. But it is more about the experience than being able to put words to it sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
chuckling, I'm red-green colorblind. And people will ask me, well, what does red look like to you? Well, how do I explain it? I mean, I don't know what words you would understand to understand what I see.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because let's say, what does red look like? Describe it. There's no real way to describe these things. That's what a near-death experience is. Describe what it feels like to get burned. oh, it burns. Okay, but describe how it feels to get burned. You have to experience these things. And I think that's what makes it really, really profound. You know, so in my mind, these things are just communicating with us. My physical body is not capable of hearing. I could feel vibration of sound, but I can't feel the vibration of light. I could feel warm sunlight on me, but you know, to me, there's a communication happening at a deep, deep level, and our body perceives it. My physical mind does not. And
But your
so
spirit
there is an
does.
awareness of it, and my spirit is so knowing of it. Yet my physical being is kind of like wandering around like Alice in Wonderland, right? Like, but anyway, Marjolin says language could be a connecting energy too. I know I hear messages in my mind. It's not like direct talking, but it is more of a spiritual hearing. And you know, the voice that we hear the most is our own. We're always talking to ourselves. So that's true. You know, that voices are very healing, centering.
Jen, I have a question for you. You talked about the acceleration of, I'm not sure I used the right word, but you feel like there's an accelerated evolution going on. Do you draw a lot of pleasure? I mean, it's got to be exciting to see this from your perspective, all these people that are coming forward, and I'm guessing it's got to be pretty exciting to be able to observe that day in, day out. Nora, maybe you've seen this as well. For me, it's fascinating to hear you people talk about these things because you've got a perspective that I wouldn't have.
Sometimes I forget that I'm in the bubble I'm in because I know that there are a lot of challenging things happening in the world, difficult things, and we're going through difficult times. I mean, I guess in human history, we're always going through some kind of difficult times, but you know, many of us are very probably overly consumed by so much news that's constantly being, you know, bombarding us with certain type of energy. And what I'm experiencing day in and day out is, I mean, there are sessions where we'll work on deep healing around our inner child or other things. So it's not just experiencing the spirit realm. There's a lot of emotional healing happening, but it is moving in this progression, in a positive progression, or at least it feels positive. I don't really see everything as positive or negative. I see it all as an essential part of the universe and part of our progression as soul beings. So I don't really look at it as good or bad anymore like I used to. There are certain things that resonate for me in this lifetime and other things that don't as a human being. But yeah, it's very exciting to be able to see the growth that is happening on a human level. And it's beautiful. I'm brought to tears frequently just by being able to witness. A lot of times after sessions, people will thank me profusely, and I'm thinking, thank you, or, you know, thank you, because it's an honor to be able to witness this journey truly. And it's very exciting to see where it's going. And I often forget about all of the big stuff that's happening, because what I'm seeing, you know, on a day-to-day basis is like, well, what do you mean there's so much growth happening? And look at this. Yeah, there's definitely an awakening happening. Seeing it compared to where my practice was 10 years ago to where it is now. And part of that could be because of my own energetic shifts as well. But there's something happening. A lot of people are waking up to feeling like there is more beyond just this life experience and feeling the need to explore that and connect with that.
Yeah, perhaps it's the contrast that's helping to move us. We're seeing enough of what we don't want that it propels us to start seeking the things we do want.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Because if everything were hunky-dory all the time and perfect, or what felt like perfect to us, it would be stagnant. There would be no reason to change. There would be nothing moving us in that direction to want to seek out something else.
So Jen, I have a question from Holly.
Oh, hi, Holly.
Are there any leading theories around why more people are suddenly having these experiences within the last few years?
I think there's probably many theories. So, I won't necessarily speak to all of them, but I think we're in a period of consciousness, soul evolution, wherever we are in that, where humanity is evolving, the consciousness of humanity is evolving. I called it sort of waking up, meaning people are becoming more aware that there is something else calling them, or they're feeling drawn to explore. They're having synchronistic experiences or metaphysical experiences that they can't explain. So many people are having spiritually transformative experiences right now. Why that's happening, I think it's just where we are at in the development of human consciousness, but other people might want to speak to that.
I can speak to that. I think people are wanting to come into human experience and evolve and have fun with that. Going from closed-minded, polarity, war paradigm thinking into expansive, more connected with our innate gifts and able to experience the love paradigm. That's just my opinion. But, I'm seeing people who would be historically very rigidly a certain way and evolving into like highly spiritually connected beings in a very short period of time. And it's so cool to watch people go, come in and have no idea what's happening to them. And then, just, over a small period of time, having access to who their soul really is wanting them to express. And it's such a joy. It's such a gift. Like how lucky we get to witness this expansion.
Yeah.
I think that there are also people on the planet who are not here to do that.
Yeah.
So we get to play in the space of expansion, and the people who are on this call and interested in this work, you're the people who are interested in expanding and evolving.
Yeah.
Interesting point.
Sorry.
We've lived all kinds of lifetimes. So, we've played in all kinds of spaces too. It's not like one is better or worse than another. It's very exciting to see because I love watching people come into a place of wholeness and loving who they are and being able to shift perspective and reclaim their inner power and do all those things. But we also are here to experience in many different ways. And so, yeah, we're not all on the same
So in
path.
a very small way, what we're doing tonight is like that, where you see the evolution. For me, being a part of something like this and hearing all these perspectives, it's very uplifting to just be a part of this.
Jen, I was wondering, do you think that some people have one incarnation on this earth and that's it? That's the only experience they have as a soul or as a person?
Yep. There are some.
I think it's possible. And Michael Newton found that it was possible. In my experience, I might have had one person I worked with where that was the experience that they reported, but I don't find it to be the vast majority of experiences, at least with people that I've worked with. It doesn't mean that it's not more so. I think energetically too, we kind of match up with wherever our energy happens to be.
There's one lady that I know of, and she'll tell you right away that this is her first incarnation. and she's here to do a certain thing. Her name is Inelia Benz, Inelia Benz. And yeah, this is the only time she's ever been here. And there's some little kids too.
Shirley?
Shirley, she has her hand up. Yeah.
Can I be heard?
Hi. Well, so much has been said, so wonderful. I do believe that where we are, I do agree with you that we are awakening. One of the things that I think we have, in order to fully awake, we have to be aware that we have been conditioned. So we have to change our way of thinking. Once we realize that this is a conditioning, media, whatever, because maybe this is a miracle that's happening before us and we don't even know it's a miracle because we're so used to looking at it one way. When this happens, something terrible is happening, but we have to change our conditioning. I had a few experiences. I know that when I was a baby and I was in a carriage and I looked up and I saw this beautiful tree, this beautiful thing. And it was the most beautiful thing I ever seen because it offered coolness, with shade, smelled fresh. And then when someone said it was a tree, it took away the beauty. It was far more beautiful than tree. I mean, so I think, once this happens and then when we realize that knowing that there is something more and we keep moving toward it and get away from the conditioning, then we will truly have evolved.
Yeah, I think one of the things that helped me on my path, and I didn't know it at the time because I had a background in mindfulness prior to having spiritually transformative experiences, and it's a synchronistic experience how I even got into mindfulness. I needed 1 credit to graduate graduate school, which is unheard of, but it happened in a really weird way because I had been given some credits. I was 1 credit short. And my graduate professor happened to be offering for the first time ever a 1 credit course in mindfulness. I didn't even know what it was, but I'm like, okay, I need a credit to graduate. This is the only 1 credit class being offered. So I'm going to take it. And through mindfulness, that led me on a whole path that I do believe was related to everything else that came after. But part of what we experience in mindfulness is being able to be in an experience of something from beginner's mind, meaning there is no word for this thing. There's no label. This sound isn't anything but sound. Like, just be in the experience of it with pure curiosity. And what is that like? And it is perspective shifting. And of course, it's hard, I think, in a day-to-day basis to maintain that level of perspective when we start getting busy in our human lives, but to be able to pause now and then and just remind yourself to be in the experience and just be curious about this does shift perspectives. And I think it's our whole perspective shifting and belief systems that change, because repetitive thoughts turn into beliefs, and that shapes how we view the world. And so through our own personal healing and personal growth that we do, it changes our perception, and we do start to see things differently in life. And then new things show up.
What a synchronicity.
And the words are, we'll find that words are limiting. It's more of a telepathic sort of communication. I think when we become more aware of that and learn how to do that, then it will be so much richer, that we'll be able to move so much quicker. Just be.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can communicate with the birds and the animals and the rock. The rock has so much knowledge.
Yes.
I remember the first time I started feeling communication happening, and I've never really talked to anybody about this, but a couple of close friends, I don't even, one of them was here, but I know she knows, but just walking somewhere and suddenly feeling this communication coming from a tree. And for the first time I had that experience, again, I'm like, what is happening to me? I'm going crazy right now. But it all has, there's consciousness in everything.
Yep.
So Jen, I'll build on that tree for a moment. I have a friend who is a king in Togo, Africa. 2 years ago, I went over there and met his family, and the reality that is experienced over there is different than the reality we experience here. One of the things that he experienced, and he's invited me to come back and experience it myself, is to meet the talking tree.
Mhm.
As part of his ascension to kinghood, he had a conversation with a tree. And I asked him, well, was this a telepathic conversation? He said, no, you could hear it. And I said, well, what did it sound like? He said, his big, booming, deep voice. And I said, does it speak English? And he said, oh, it'll speak any language.
Mhm.
So he's invited me to come back. And I don't tell many people this because it's in a Western way of thinking, it's pretty far out there. But if I could go over there and have a conversation with a tree, that would be quite a story.
Yes. Get ready.
Beautiful.
Get ready. Oh boy.
We should
What?
probably start looking at bringing this to a close. Maybe a couple more questions, if there's still some out there.
I have one thing that came while we were talking, and it says, we were talking about how we're getting ready for awakening, and we need to do this, and we need to do that, and we need to do that. And what came to me was, it's time. It's just time. And because it's time, things are lining up, and they'll happen whether you make them happen or not. It's just time.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know if I can make a comment, Jim.
Yes.
I don't have any video.
All right.
Jennifer, all I'm doing all the way through this is just shaking my head with tears in my eye. I had a near-death experience. And you said about purpose. The message that I got in the garden, believe in yourself, you make your own heaven and hells. Keep doing what you're doing with love. And like you had mentioned, this love share, if you could see this, I was so frustrated as far as how can I share this energy? And I learned how to make a ribbon rose. And I give that ribbon rose away when somebody recognizes it, or I see that flower growing in someone else. It's the simplest way I have found to express my love to life. Jim's got one, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been giving those away since 1984. Today, I met somebody at Walmart. I got your rose. So it's this metamorphosis, like you had mentioned, of us changing from fear, confrontation, survival, that got us here, but it's becoming self-destructive. Love, collaboration, coming from that heart chakra, and the electromagnetic energy around our hat is 5,000 times stronger than anything coming from the mind.
Yes.
And this yes, up and down, I get that to a lot of people when I'm sharing my story. I had 5 major brain surgeries, but with a near-death experience, I can share both of them. I get the head shaking up and down. They want to see something else in their life. They believe it. So thank you very much. Your energy is wonderful.
I'm gonna cut in real quick, guys, because I gotta check out. I am loving this conversation, and I don't want to go, but I have a session at 6, so I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone. This was really a really good conversation, and thank you.
Thanks, Jose.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night, everybody. And I think Bill has his hand up before I leave.
I'm a little bit of a cynic. I was just thinking here, and I agree with you. It seems like it's the time that we're experiencing an awakening. But then you look at all of the people that are stuck with doing Twitter type text on your phones and developing increasingly short attention spans. And you think, well, we're not quite there yet, but I guess we just need to keep on working at it.
Mute currently unmuted. Host disabled.
All right. I find myself thinking, Jen, that at some point in the future, we got to all get back together again. The participation, the perspectives. I think that if we let a few months go by, it might be fun to try doing this again.
Yeah, I would
So
love that.
we'll talk a little bit about that separately.
The one thing I
Thank you,
can
everybody.
say about, though the COVID situation, everything going on, is it has brought some people together that I think might not have otherwise connected. And we've noticed that in our trainings too. People have said, if this hadn't gone online, I wouldn't have been able to access this. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, Bill, your point about Twitter, there's another side of that Jen's making, that this group wouldn't have connected today had we not had COVID. So can you look at COVID as maybe, we tend to think of it as a terrible thing, but there are some good things that have come out of it.
Miracle.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. Thank you, Jen, for sharing your perspectives on things and stimulating conversation and questions. This will be put on our YouTube channel, our Consciousness Cafe YouTube channel. If you know somebody that would have liked to have been here tonight but couldn't attend and they really want to hear what went on, you can go to that YouTube channel and listen to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for any people who know me, who signed on, found Consciousness Cafe through me, I think they can sign up, right, for future events if you are hosting them online. I know you might be getting back to in person at some point. And I also want to thank Karen. Karen, thank you for coming and sharing your experience and talking about your NDE and LBL, and Anne and everybody else who has shown up today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
I just put the Consciousness Cafe website in the chat. If you think it might be an interesting, Daniel and Jose and I and others have created this website, and we're trying to just be facilitators, I guess, of this awakening that's going on. So,
yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll bring us to a close, and hopefully we'll get back together again in a few months. There will be an interesting presentation at Consciousness Cafe coming up. Let's see, February 1st, Dr. Q will be speaking. He is involved with the Indian Palm Leaf Reading Institute. Some Maharishis 3,000 years ago connected, I would suggest, with the Akashic records and wrote all they got on these leaves. I know at least one person here has had a leaf reading. I'm probably going to have one before that meeting. I think you'll find that this is interesting. It ties in with what Jen's been talking about. We come into this life with objectives, and these palm leaves have some of that information on it. It also ties in with what was said earlier about time. How can somebody 3,000 years ago have written something about my life 3,000 years later? Well, if time is irrelevant, that might help explain it. Okay, well, looking forward to seeing people again. Again, thank you, Jen, and we'll bring this to a close.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.